In lesson 26, we're going to continue dividing decimals. And this time we're going to use our standard algorithm for our long division, and we're going to go into the decimal place values. The equation we're going to be using is 904 divided by 32. The steps that we're using are going to be from lesson 23, and we're just going to pick up where we left off there and carry it into our decimal place values. Alright, the steps to the side are the steps we learned in lesson 23, and we're going to go through those quickly with this division problem. First, we want to identify our whole and our divisor. Our whole here is the amount that we're dividing, and the divisor is essentially how many groups we're dividing into. Then we want to write our standard algorithm. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. In the division sign, we have our 904, our whole, and on the outside we have our divisor, which is 32. And remember, we read this backwards as 904 divided by 32. Now we want to set our context, and we just use this sentence frame here. If we had blank pounds, and this would be our whole, of rice, and blank bags, our divisor, how much rice would be in each bag? So for this problem, it would be if we had 904 pounds of rice and 32 bags, how much rice would be in each bag? And we can kind of start to think about what would be a reasonable answer for this problem. I see that I have quite a bit of pounds of rice, and I have way more than my divisor, so I know that my answer is going to include a whole number. Now moving on to step 3, I'm going to round my divisor and find multiples, and this just gets me ready for the estimation that I'm going to use to solve my division. I'm going to round my divisor down to 30, and I can think of this as 30. I can think of this 30 as 3 tens, and when I skip count or I find my multiples, I can find my multiples of 3 and just make it tens because this is 3 tens. So next would be 6 tens. Next would be 9 tens. 12 tens. You guys see how I'm adding that 0, skip counting by 3s, but just making it into tens because 30 is 3 tens. And I'll go one more. 15 tens. So by decomposing my original divisor, it's easier to skip count. So skip counting by 30s would be 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. And if I need to go up further as I go along, I can. So I've done step 3. Now I start with step 4. First, we're going to decompose the whole to the first place value, which is 9 hundredths. And then I ask myself, can I divide 9 hundredths by 32? No, I can't without going into decimals. So I want to find a bigger whole number to make my division a little bit easier. So I'm going to decompose to the next place value, which is 10. So I'm going to have 90 tens, and I'm going to ask myself, how many times, or I'm going to estimate about how many times can 32 go into 90. I see here that 90 is one of my multiples, and that was 1, 2, 3. So the first number I'm going to try is 3, and here's where our estimation comes into play. We record it, then we multiply 3 times 32, and that is 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9. Now I have to check, can I do this multiplication sentence without getting a negative number? Can I have 90 gummy bears and give away 96? The answer is no, which means that I overestimated and I need to take away a group. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to change my estimation. 3 didn't work, so I'm taking away a group and I'm going to go down to 2, and I'm going to try it again. So I record, now I multiply. 2 times 2 is 4. And then 2 times 3 is 6. Now I do my first check. Can I do 90 minus 64? And the answer is yes. So I did not overestimate. Now I can do my subtraction. I borrow. 10 minus 4 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. And I have 26 tens left. And I ask myself again, can I make another group of 32? The answer is no, which means that my estimate of 2 was correct. Now I continue on, moving to the next place value. This was tens, and I'm going to drop down my 4, and I'm going to estimate and divide to the ones place. So I have 264 ones. So I'm going to ask myself, about how many times can 32 go into 264 ones? My estimate here, I only went up to 5, so I know that it's going to be more than 5. And I could keep going and try to find an estimate that would work, 180 or 18 tens. And I could go to 21 tens, which would be 7. I could go to 24 tens, and I'm going to stop here at 24 tens or 240 because I don't want to go above 264. So if this was 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm going to try my estimate of 8. So I record it, then I multiply 32 times 8, and I'm going to do that on the side here because this is a little bit harder to do in your head. So we have 32 times 8, so 8 times 2 is 16. And then 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1 is 25. So I'm going to subtract 256. And I stop here and I ask myself, can I do 264 minus 256? I can, so I didn't overestimate. Now I do my subtraction, regroup with 5, and then make that into 14. That would be 8. And then 5 minus 5 is 0. So here is where we usually stop, and our answer would be 28 remainder 8. But now we're going to continue on with dividing into the decimals. Step 6 is we want to decompose the remainder of 8 to a smaller unit so we can keep dividing. Our 8 is in ones, and the next lowest column to ones is tenths, so I'm going to decompose to tenths. But first, I have to change my whole to show tenths. So I add a decimal and then add a 0 without changing my number. And then I can drop that 0 down and decompose 8 into 80 tenths. At this point, you may be able to divide, or you may need to regroup or decompose to a smaller place value depending on how much of a remainder you had and how much your divisor was. We don't have to further regroup at this point because we have 80 and we can make groups of 32. So now we kind of repeat step 5. We estimate, we record our estimate, multiply, subtract, and then check our answer. One thing you need to be aware of is you need to make sure that because our answer or estimate is going to be in tenths, that we add that decimal to the quotient so that it is correct. So how many groups of 32 can go into 80? And looking up here, my closest estimate to 80 would be 90, which would be about 3. But I know 80 is a little bit less than 90, so I'm going to go down to 2. So 2 tenths, because my 80 is in tenths, I record, then I multiply 2 times 32, which is 2 times 2 is 4. And then 2 times 3 is 6, and I subtract. One check is, can I do 80 minus 64? The answer is yes, so I know that I didn't overestimate. So we subtract. 8 becomes a 7, we rename as tens, and then 10 minus 4 is 6, and then 7 minus 6 is 1. And here we do our second check. Can I make another group of 32 out of 16? And the answer is no, so I know that my estimate was correct at 2. And now I'm just going to keep repeating these steps 6 and below until I don't have any more digits or I don't have a remainder. So what can I decompose 16 tenths into to get a smaller unit? And that would be the next smallest place value, which is hundredths. So I add a 0 up top to my whole, and remember, this doesn't change how much the whole is worth, we're just adding zeros. And then I drop that 0 down, and so now I've renamed my 16 tenths as 160 hundredths. Now I estimate, and in looking up here, I have 180 and 150 multiples. 150 is below 160, so I'm going to go with that one, and that is about 30 times 5. So I'm going to estimate that there's about 5 groups of 32 in 160. So I record my answer, and then I multiply. I'm going to do my multiplication here to the side so that I can check it as I go. So 32 times 5. 5 times 2 is 10. Leave the 1, or leave the 0, carry the 1. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16. So I multiplied, now I subtract, do my first check. Can I do 160 minus 160? The answer is yes, so I didn't overestimate. And if I have 160 and take away 160, the answer is 0. So I do my second check. Can I make another group? No. So I know my estimate of 5 was correct. I have a remainder of 0, so then I know I am done with my long division problem. So my answer to 904 divided by 32 is 28.25, or 28 and 25 hundredths. So I'm going to go back to my context and check the reasonableness of my answer. If we had 904 pounds of rice and 32 bags, how much rice would be in each bag? When I was thinking about my answer, I said that there would be a mixture kind of a whole number at least, and maybe a little bit of a decimal, and I see that that is about right. You also can check your answer, which is the final step, and you check your answer through multiplication. So whereas before when we had the remainder, we just added the remainder on, now that we have continued dividing into decimals and we don't have a remainder, we just multiply the quotient, which is 32, by the, the divisor, 32 divided or multiplied by the quotient, which is 28.25. And if you remember when we were multiplying by decimals, we kind of say, oh, how can I make this decimal a whole number? By multiplying this one by 100. So I'm going to multiply by 100, and remembering that when we get to our answer that we're going to divide by 100 to make it equal. So I've done this. Oops. A little bit smaller. So take out my decimal because I multiplied by 100, and now I can multiply. So 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry the 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And then I move on to the 3, which is not 3, it's 3 tens, so I need to make sure I show that in my partial products with a 0. And then I can move on to multiplying, but first I want to cross off so I don't use those again. 3 times 5 is 15. leave the 5, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7.